Yasmine Mohammed. Welcome to the Inquiring Mind podcast.
Thank you for having me, Stanley.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. Obviously, I read your book, Unveiled. It was spectacular. It was inspirational. It was brave. Um,
Thank
there are
you.
times where I'm not afraid to say I was a little. There's a little bit of a tearjerker. So, but before we get started, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your story?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada. My mom was the second wife to a man who was already married and already had 3 kids. But when her marriage fell apart with my dad, she went looking for comfort and community, and that led her to the local mosque. That's where she found this guy. And as soon as they got together, that's when my life completely changed. So that's when she had to start wearing hijab. That means covering her head and her body, everything but her face and hands. We started having to read Quran and pray 5 times a day, memorize the Quran. We get in so much trouble if we didn't memorize it. Music is haram. Birthdays are haram. Non-Muslim friends are haram. Haram means forbidden. So it just came into our lives and made everything forbidden. And eventually, when I was 9, I was also put in hijab, sent to an Islamic school. And we lived a life that was, even though we were in Canada, we were pretty much separated from the rest of society. And eventually got forced into a marriage with a man who my family felt he was strong enough to control me, because I was an inquisitive person. I never did anything, I never drank. I never had a boyfriend. I never smoked pot. I never did anything. I never even took off my hijab. Like, there's so many girls that go to, like, they leave their home in the morning with hijab and then they take it off all day at school and then they put it on before they go home. I didn't even have the nerve to do that. Like, I was too scared to do that. So even though I was unhappy with my life, I was too scared to rebel, but it was still not, I was still not docile enough. I wasn't subservient enough. So they chose a man who was a jihadi. He's a member of Al-Qaeda. He's in prison in Egypt now. And I had a daughter with him. And once I had my daughter, that's when everything changed, because I really was so sure that I didn't want her to live the life that I had been living. I wanted her to know freedom. I wanted her to know happiness. And I felt like I was willing to risk anything to try and get that for her. It was my responsibility. So the courage that I couldn't find for myself, I found when it came to protecting her, and eventually got away from him. Is a long and detailed, you read my book, so you know how that was such a just by the skin of my teeth, and was able to get away from him, was able to get away from my family eventually, and go to university and start my life all over again. And I stayed quiet for a very long time, never mentioned the fact that I grew up Muslim until the infamous episode with Sam Harris and Ben Affleck on Bill Maher, where the two men were talking about very, things that any liberal should be supportive of, which is, the fact that in a lot of Muslim majority countries, and the one they were specifically talking about at the time was in Egypt, and how 86% of people in Egypt, which is where my family is from, believed that people who left the religion, me, should be executed. And so they were talking about how, liberals are failing people like me because they're not talking about that. They're failing gay Muslims because they're not talking about the fact that you can be executed in 15 Muslim majority countries. And the two men, of course, were attacked by Ben Affleck and all these other white knights that came running in to say, who are these men to talk? They're gross and racist. They have no right. They are just white men. They have no right to speak. And so that's when I felt like, all right, well, here I am. I'm an Arab woman. I'm going to say the exact same thing. So force people to engage with the actual arguments instead of just attacking people's immutable characteristics and refusing to listen to what they even have to say. And that's how I got here.
And what's the relationship like with your mother? Do you talk to her at all, or no? Is it just
No, I haven't had any contact with my mom for about 15 years. When I took off my hijab, she said, if you've taken off your hijab, the next step is that you're going to leave the religion. And so I'll have to make sure that you're killed before that happens, because I don't want to spend eternity in hell because I failed to raise a good Muslim daughter. So she felt like killing me was essential to save her own soul. So it wasn't even like it was very important for her to save her soul. She's a true believer and she's totally indoctrinated. And to her, it wasn't even a human emotional, the fact that I was her daughter, she was my mother, didn't play into it. It was like she saw herself as needing to do this to save her soul. And so my daughter and I changed our names and moved away, and we've had nothing to do with her or anybody in the community or family or anybody that I grew up with. We just completely separated ourselves for our own safety.
yeah? What's really startling about your story is that, as sad as this is, you would expect the story maybe somewhere in the Middle East, or
Mm.
but this is Canada, right? It's not, you know, it's not that far away.
Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so what's interesting. Sorry, I'm sorry if I interrupted a thought, but what's interesting to me is that what was that transition like for your mom? Because you got to experience it as, her daughter. Was she uh, like very conservative before? Was she religious, or was it?
No,
But what really got her sort of hooked on religion?
she's what I call a born again Muslim. So, even though she grew up in a very secular Egypt, and my dad's totally not religious, she didn't grow up religious at all. When she found herself, so her and my dad were living in San Francisco, and that's where they had my sister. And then they moved to Canada. And so she was new there. She didn't know anybody when their marriage fell apart. And so she just unfortunately went to the mosque looking for community because she's Egyptian. She thought she'd find other Arabic speaking people there. Um, just looking for community, I guess, looking for something, for support. And unfortunately, it was at a time, which you're too young to remember this, but there was a very clear, you could really see the whole world, the whole Muslim majority world, and you could even see it here in the West as well, how everything started to become a lot more fundamentalist in the late 70s, early 80s. And, you could see that it started with Iran, 40 years ago, the Islamic regime in Iran took over. And then there was, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. So that's where you have your Osama bin Laden and all those guys, getting power. Islamist people like Muslim Brotherhood, Hizb ut-Tahrir, all of these things were growing. A lot of the issues you hear about in the Middle East, whether it's Iraq or Libya or, Syria, all of it has a lot, Lebanon, it has a lot to do with all of this pro-Islamic phenomenon that started to happen at the time. So my mom's experience paralleled what was happening in the world as well. So yeah, and you could see that like even in our mosque, we had a small mosque that was led by a man from India, and then the money from Saudi Arabia started rolling in. That has a big part of it too, right? Like that's when the money in all of these oil-rich Arab monarchies, right? Like that has a big part of why this huge pro-Islamic / anti-Western, they're hand in hand, sentiment started growing. So the money from Saudi Arabia started flowing in. All of a sudden we have a massive mosque, and we've got, they're building a school, and everything changed. Like, say, it used to be very inclusive. Like there used to be people from, Indian Muslims are usually a lot more relaxed. But when the Saudi Arabian money came in, it started to become a lot more Arab. So it was like our imam spoke Arabic, all of the signs, like if it said namaz, it got changed to salah. I know this doesn't, it just basically, when it just started to become a lot more fundamentalist. So yeah, my mom just followed the same trajectory. Like it was just it's almost cliche that she became a fundamentalist around the same time that everybody else did.
Yeah, and how much do you attribute this to the religion versus just a set of bad ideas, right? Because this is the debate that people in the West have all the time. I think maybe too much sometimes, but there's always the debate: is Islam a religion of peace or not? I personally find that a very difficult question to answer. I don't know.
Well, let's look at the reality.
Sorry, but I've had a lot of friends that are Muslim, and they were always people were nice to me, and I'm nice to them, and that's how it goes. But there are the fundamentalists in every religion. I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. There are fundamentalists in every religion. Why is Islam different?
So the difference is that the fundamentalists in other religions are not leading 50 countries on the planet. So they're not putting their Westboro Baptist Church does not have a country where they are murdering people for being gay, or forcing women to dress a certain way, otherwise they get thrown in prison. So the fact that other fundamentalist religions or other fundamentalist people exist is like, sure, but they are defanged to a certain extent. I understand it definitely causes problems, especially in places like South America, where women aren't allowed to get divorced or aren't allowed to get abortions. And I understand that there are obviously problems with the fundamentals of other religions. First and foremost, I grew up Muslim, so that's why I'm speaking about Islam more than other religions. Secondly, Islam is the biggest problem on our planet today. It is causing harm to more people than any other religion is today. It has power more than any other religion does globally today. So in America, people are so scared of the evangelical Christians coming into having anything to do with government, as they should, right? But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about Iran, and when we're talking about Afghanistan, and we're talking about Saudi Arabia, and we're talking about Somalia, all of these countries. What you fear having your religious fundamentalists in your government, making laws, that's the life of millions and millions of people across this planet.
Mhm. And when you finally decided to sit down and write your book, were you afraid of blowback, criticism, or and did that actually occur when you did publish the book?
Yes and yes. I knew there was gonna be criticism. It wasn't even that I was afraid of it. It was like I knew there was going to be. It was just a matter of, do I want to do this? Because I know how much, I know how difficult it's going to be. Um, and so I decided to do it, and I wasn't surprised when it was really difficult. But it's kind of like when my mom said that she was going to kill me. There was this moment where I knew that was going to happen. Of course, like I know the religion. My mom was a student of Al Azhar University, which is the most prestigious Islamic university. She was the head of the Islamic Studies department at our Islamic school. She knows her religion inside out. And it was very important for us to know our religion inside out because we're her children, and that would make her look bad if we weren't very good Muslim kids. Um, so I knew that was going to be her natural conclusion. But there's still a part of you, despite it all, that feels like just maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll be surprised. And I wasn't. And the same thing happened with my book. You know, I had a little inkling of a light in me that was saying, just it's possible that they might actually care to hear the story of a woman who suffered under a very misogynist religion. Maybe they'll care enough to hear me speak and to hear me tell you the story of so many other women who are also living the same life. Maybe they'll care. Maybe it will pull on their heartstrings. Maybe they'll have a memory of women covered in body bags in Afghanistan and think to themselves, you know, maybe I should have some empathy. These are human beings. But it didn't happen. And I ended up self-publishing. And I'm very, very grateful that the book has done really, really well with people. People do care, and people are interested, and people are learning and shocked and dismayed and apologetic that they had never really taken the time to pay attention before. Like you said at the beginning of this conversation, you know, this happened in Vancouver, happened in Canada. And so many people, you know, it's easy to kind of think, oh, it's happening over there. But when you realize it's happening over here, people feel differently about it. So of course, these ideas don't have borders, right? It travels in the minds. You know, if I were to go to, you know, Cuba, I'm not going to suddenly think that communism is a good idea. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter. You carry your values and your ideas with you. So, yeah, it was as expected. It was difficult to publish the book, but I'm very glad that I was convinced by both my husband and Sam Harris to finally publish it. And I'm very grateful that I've reached a lot of people. I get so many messages from people all the time telling me that the two greatest groups of messages I get, number one is from women saying, I am so sorry that I supported the hijab. I didn't think about it. I thought it was an empowering feminist thing that women chose to wear. I didn't think hard enough about it to realize of course it's a tool of rape culture. Of course it's victim blaming and slut shaming. And of course it's misogyny. Um, and the second group I hear from are people who are social workers, um, and people who work in somehow in that area, where they tell me that they actively are forced to turn a blind eye to girls like me who are living in minority groups because um, it's what they have to do, because it's what the powers that be demand of them. So there is a cultural relativism, a moral relativism that goes on where, like, I'll just say, for example, in the UK, how often girls are mutilated, female genital mutilation, how it happens there. And if it's a Somali family that did it to their kid, that Somali family would just be like a slap on the wrist, be like, oh, you shouldn't, don't you know, you shouldn't take a razor blade to your daughter's genitals. That's not nice. So they educate them. But if this were, a blonde hair, blue eyed British person that took a razor blade to their daughter's clitoris and chopped it off,
Oh
there's
boy.
no education. That person would be behind bars. They would be, in a psychiatric hospital. There would be a strong resistance to that. So when there is that sort of two-tiered, I'll protect these girls, but not these girls, they think that they're doing it to somehow protect these minority groups. But what you end up doing is protecting the people that are victimizing the people in those groups. And that's not just for girls in those groups, it's also for gay kids in those groups as well.
Yeah, that's a weird separation in a person's brain where they can see the same thing happen to two different people, um, and you know cry out for help for one person and then not cry out for the other. What do you attribute that to? Is it fear of a repercussion, or is it like a societal pressure to not say anything?
I think it's both of those things. So if we look at the girls who were raped in all over the UK, the massive amount of them in Rotherham, there was like, the girls were as young as 11 years old in these huge rape gangs by these Pakistani men predominantly. It went on for so long because anybody within the police or any journalist or any politician that tried to speak up about it was told that they were being a bigot, and they were told they were being Islamophobic. And of course, what those people were doing was they were facilitating, they were allowing the rape of these girls to continue because they were stopping the criticism or they were stopping the investigations. So yeah, that comes from two places. I think first and foremost, it's very narcissistic. They're just concerned about, I don't want to be called a racist. I don't want to be called a bigot. I don't want to be called an Islamophobe. So I'm just going to ignore the fact that this is happening to those people. So they are making that active choice, whether they want to admit it or not. They are making that active choice. Some people feel sick about it later, and that's why I get so many letters, because they really do truly feel that they are simply a cog in the wheel. They feel like, if I speak up about this, I'll get fired, I'll lose my job, I won't be able to feed my kids, and it's still not going to change anything. Or I'll lose my reputation and I won't be able to get rehired again, blah, blah, blah. I'll ruin my own life, but I still won't have succeeded in stopping this big, huge thing to continue happening. This machine is still going to continue without me. And so I have empathy. I understand why a lot of people choose to bite their tongues in this situation. That's what's happening in the Muslim world too. That's why you don't hear from people in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Somalia, and that's why they're not talking, is because they're going to be thrown in prison or they're going to be killed. And so that's why you don't hear from people are like, where are the moderate Muslims? Scared for their life is where they are. You know, they're the only moderate Muslims you're going to hear from, the reform Muslims, are in Australia or in the UK or in America, or if they're in a safe country. The ones that are in Muslim majority countries, you won't hear them speaking out. And it's the same sort of thing. Like here now, there's a lot of what we call cancel culture. So if you speak out against the dominant, narrative, you could be canceled. You could lose your job. You could da 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 da. So for people in those countries, canceling literally means losing their lives. But it's the same mechanism, it's the dominant narrative. And do you want to be that one person who speaks out? And is it worth it? And will it make a difference? And so, yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And a second part of it is fear, truly fear, because what do Muslims do when you draw a cartoon, right? Or when you write a book that they don't like. So people are legitimately not just afraid to lose their job, blah blah blah, but they are afraid to lose their lives. I mean, look what happened to that teacher in the UK. Look what happened to the teacher in France. So these are legitimate fears. That's why it makes sense that people would be too afraid to speak up.
Yeah, I think whenever people bring up this issue and they say, where are the moderate Muslims? I will always point to uh, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, right? And go, well, look at what happened to her.
Yeah.
And she has to walk in the West. She has to walk around with bodyguards. She can't tell you where she's, if she has a Zoom call, she can't tell you where she's coming from, like where she lives, because she's afraid for her life. That's not normal.
Mm-mm.
Nobody should fear a repercussions for something they say in the West, especially.
Yeah.
And I think we've gone to a point where it's very taboo to speak about certain things, and it's part of what you just said. People are afraid to lose their jobs, and I think that's the biggest reason people don't speak out, because people have rent to pay and bills to
Yeah.
pay, and they don't want to speak out. So obviously, you said you're empathetic and you sympathize with those people, but there are some people, maybe I misconstrued his statement, but for example, Jordan Peterson says that we have almost a responsibility, a moral responsibility to speak up. And anybody speaking up has a ripple effect of some kind.
Correct. I agree.
But how can you tell that to a person that has everything to lose and seemingly nothing to gain?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the thing is when people do speak up, we should all be supportive of them, of each other. We should have each other's back so that it makes it safer for more people to speak up. But I think sometimes I feel like the tide is shifting, and then other times I feel like it's shifting in the other direction. But I totally agree with Jordan Peterson that it is our moral obligation to speak up, to speak the truth. But there's definitely a high price that's going to come with that. And every individual person needs to just make the decision about whether it's worth it to them or not, which is why I'm very, very appreciative of people like you or anybody that is willing to talk about this topic. And it's because to me, I have skin in the game. You know what I mean? Like this was my experience. This was my life. This is a part of me. And so when I speak up about it, it's almost expected. Do you know what I mean? Like it fits that I would talk about it. But when somebody puts their neck out, like the way Sam Harris did, or the way Bill Maher did, I have the utmost respect for that, because they didn't need to do that. They knew what was going to happen if they did that. They could have easily stayed quiet and just ignored us. Sam has this TED talk that he did in 2010 where he brings up a picture of all of these women in Afghanistan covered in burqas. And he says, who are we? Who are we as human beings to pretend that we don't understand this? And he has 2 daughters of his own. And the day he did that TED talk, one of his daughters had just taken her first step. And so it was, to him, he was seeing those girls on the screen like his own daughters, which is something most people don't do. Most people see us as an other, like subhuman. And it's not worth speaking out for us. So I'm really grateful when there are people like Sam Harris who are willing to, despite all of the pushback, are willing to speak up. And I was just speaking with Dr. Phyllis Chesler, who is a woman. She grew up Jewish and married a man from Afghanistan, converted to Islam briefly, wrote a book about it called An American Bride in Kabul. And as soon as she starts to speak out about Afghani women, because she lived there and these were her family, and she understands what it's like for those women in that country, as soon as she started to do that, none of the feminists that used to support her wanted to support her anymore. All of a sudden, she was getting disinvited. All of a sudden, New York Times didn't want to print her anymore. You know, she had to pay a very heavy price for speaking up for women in Afghanistan. Like there couldn't be a more honorable thing to do with your life than to speak up for these most powerless of women. And instead, she's demonized for it. And it's not something she's going to bounce back from. That's it. She has now been blackballed. And again, she's one of the people that I most admire in this world, because I know she knew the cost of speaking out, but she still did it anyway. And I just feel like the more and more of us that do that, the easier and easier it will be for others. So you brought up Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She is like the first, she's like the ex-Muslim queen, right? She's the first one to come forward. Salman Rushdie, you know, the godfather of ex-Muslims. So these are people that took the real hit. They were like, you know, just the first ones to be public. Anybody that comes behind those people is in one way or another protected by them. And the more people that speak up, the more and more we shelter those that come behind us. And it kind of reminds me of growing up in Vancouver, which is a very liberal city, but even there, you know, if you had a gay teacher, they wouldn't say it. They wouldn't say publicly that they were. There was like this stigma around being gay. It was okay to make homophobic jokes, and Pride Parade, people would get arrested and things like that. So and then obviously the whole AIDS crisis, and so many reasons why it was dangerous to come out publicly and say that you were gay. But people did it. They did it. They kept doing it. And they kept doing it, and they kept doing it, and they kept doing it. So to the point that this generation of kids don't even understand what the controversy is. It's probably, it's so blasé. Nobody even cares anymore. It's so normal to say that you're not straight. And that's what we have to do. We have to keep speaking about it in order to normalize it. And the people that do it up at the beginning, you know, again, you're too young to remember this, but Rock Hudson, when he came out as gay, or George Michael, these were big deals back then. But they're not big deals anymore, not so long later. And so, yeah, we just have to keep on talking. Each one of us has to just keep on talking. So even you don't have to take a big risk, but just talk with your family, with your friends online. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not asking you to put your job in danger or anything like that. But, you know, if everybody just has rational conversations instead of being too scared to speak at all, then I think, like you said, the ripple effect will happen. But people have to be willing to drop the pebbles in the pond.
Completely agree. Um, one of the things I did want to follow up on, how old was your daughter when you wanted to, get out? And
Well, she was when I wanted to get out.
oh, sorry,
I always wanted to get out.
sorry, when you did get out with your daughter.
When I finally got out with my daughter, she was close to 3 years old.
So she has no recollection pretty much
No,
of, wow.
not of
What
him.
how is did you sit her down and tell her this story?
No, I did not, because I did not want her to identify in any way with a terrorist. I didn't want her to grow up knowing that she shares 50% of her DNA with that person. So I actively never allowed any of that into her life, to the point that I actually feel a little bit bad now. I'm like, I could have taught her a bit of Arabic. I could have introduced her to some Egyptian music, but I never did. I completely wanted her, you are 100% Canadian, and that's it. And I wanted her to not have any connection at all with that world or anything to do with it. When she was 18, however, I gave her a scrapbook that I had been collecting for her all these years, with letters that I had been writing to her. So it was always on my mind, but I just didn't want it in her mind. And once she was old enough and sort of established as who she was, then it wasn't going to affect her internally. I don't know if that's making sense, but it wasn't going to be a part of her identity. As far as she's concerned, this is mom's life, and it's a story she's reading of other people over there, but it doesn't feel like it's a part of her, which is exactly what I wanted.
Hmm. And did she have I can't imagine not having an emotional reaction when hearing the story, but was she shocked? Was she, what was the reaction? Like,
Yeah, well, she was shocked. The thing is she kind of remembered these things, but just never talked about it. So she remembered me wearing hijab. She kind of remembered my mom, and how she has like a few stories of my mom that she remembers. She doesn't remember her dad at all. But she knew that I didn't want to talk about those things. And so she never brought it up. But then we were finally able to talk about everything more openly. It really helped our relationship too, because we were at the point, teenage daughters and their moms, there's that point where things start to get dicey. And through talking about my story and what I'd been through, she was able to understand me and my intentions more, so that she understood that it wasn't personal. So I'll give you an example. I was always the kind of person that I would encourage her to do everything. Do you want to do baseball? Do you want to do softball? Do you want to do basketball? Do you want to do hockey? Do you want to do ballet? What do you want to do? You want to do hip hop dancing? What are you interested in? Do you want to travel? You want to go around Europe? Where do you want to go? You want to go to France? You want to go to Germany? I was always very like, I wanted her to have everything in the world because I didn't have anything. And so I was trying to make sure that she always knew that she could do anything she wanted. But my daughter is a very introverted person that just wanted to sit there with her cats. Like she did. So she felt very pressured by me saying, her friends were going backpacking around Europe. They were going to Australia. And I was like, why don't you go with them? Why are you staying home? What do you do? Blah, 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 blah. And she just didn't want to. And she felt a lot of pressure from me. And she understood after reading my book that the pressure that she was feeling from me in the past, she felt like she was disappointing me, or that I was disappointed in her because I wanted her to do things. And I felt like, oh, why are you being so lazy? Why aren't you doing stuff? That's kind of how she was seeing it. But after reading my book, she understood, oh, okay, so this is about you. This isn't about me. This is about you wanting to, sort of live vicariously through me, relive your childhood and your 20s. And when you were at that age, you wanted all of these things. So you're trying to give them to me. And that's very true. And it's something that I hadn't even thought about either. But yeah, like when she was younger, I'd buy her a Barbie dream house because I always wanted a Barbie dream house. Do you know what I mean? Like I was doing a lot of that, but I had never even really thought about it. And her and I are very different people. I'm very, outgoing, risk taker, extroverted, and she's very, she's an artist. She likes quiet, like I said, she likes her cats more than anything. So that was a really good, it was a really big turning point in our relationship, and it allowed us to, I think there's a point in every person's life where they start to see their parent as a human being, just a person with all of their baggage and issues, and no longer seeing them as mom, but as another woman. And so that was that point for us. But I'm happy to say that as far as any kind of internal confusion about her own identity or anything like that, none of that happened. She's very confident in who she is. She loves her stepdad. She loves her sister. It's like I remarried when she was 9 years old. So she just, that's her life. Yeah.
That's good to hear. So when you talk about these issues, oftentimes issues like these get politicized unnecessarily, obviously. And one of the things when I first noticed this in my own, I guess, awakening on these issues, one of those moments was the Sam Harris Ben Affleck clip. I think that was seminal to so many people that watch Bill Maher and just pay attention to things. But for me, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, again, I'm going to mention her name. She always seemed like she was right leaning, or she hung out with people that were more conservative. But oddly enough, when I read her book or when I heard her speak, I'm like, but she's not really a conservative. Why is it that, again, as a person that's politically down the middle of the political aisle, why is it that people on the right seem to be more willing to hear out these stories and these issues than people on the left?
So, and you did identify that correctly. So she was part of the Labour Party when she was a member of parliament. But when she was kicked out of that party and kicked out of the country, she was embraced by a conservative think tank in the US. So you're absolutely correct in that a lot of us who are speaking out against Islam are completely ignored or demonized by people who should share our values. And instead, we're getting microphones over on the other side of the political aisle. And I think that there's probably two reasons for that. I think first and foremost, everybody on the left has been trained with this political correctness idea that you cannot criticize any religions or cultures unless it's Western. To do so is bigoted, racist, whatever. And so even though they're speaking up for, like, they would potentially be speaking up for something that they believe in, a value that they agree with, let's say feminism, the fact that it's a woman fighting, if that woman is fighting against American patriarchy or Western patriarchy, 100% behind her. But if that woman is fighting against Islamic or Arab patriarchy, they can't do it. They've been trained to not do that. Otherwise, they're going to be considered racist. And so they leave us to the wolves. And basically, again, like I said earlier, what they're doing is they are facilitating more harm to come to us because they're choosing to either ignore us, which is much preferable to the second thing that they do, which is to actively support the fundamentalist and conservative Muslims, because they think that that's what you do. You support minority groups, even if those minority groups are misogynist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, doesn't matter. So that's what's going on the left. And I think on the right, to a certain extent, it comes from religious people on the right who believe that their God is better than the Islamic God. So there's some of that going on. But I really don't think that it's, I really don't think that it's as huge of an issue, because there's a lot of people on the right are not religious, but they're still willing to support people like me or people like Ayaan. And it's because they haven't been fed the same rules as people on the left, or they haven't agreed to the same rules as people on the left, which is that you can't criticize somebody if they're from another culture. They never bought into that. They're like, no, I'm going to criticize it regardless of where it's coming from. And
Yeah,
that's where I stand too. I appreciate that. It should, the geographical location or the religion or the skin color, completely irrelevant to me. That's called moral relativism. And frankly, it's disgusting in my opinion.
yeah, I think I see this the most, especially on the left, and I criticize people on the left a little more than I do on the right because, well, I used to associate myself more with people on the left, and a lot of my friends were people on the left until I realized, well, they weren't. But I see this a lot with a person like Ilan Omar, right? And she often gets criticized, and people on the left will jump on those critiques and go, people that criticize her and go, well, you're just being
Racist.
Islamophobic or racist or
Yeah.
whatnot. But no, I mean, it's not bad to admit that she just has some bad ideas that I disagree with. And it doesn't have to be about the color of her skin or her religion or whatever, or her ethnicity. Um, how do we get over that? How do we begin to have this kind of, I guess, reckoning with these ideas and not see everything as um, through a lens of religion or race or whatnot, but seeing it through just purely analyzing ideas and in a purely kind of rational mindset?
Well, I think identity politics is starting to fall apart gratefully. I think things like Caitlyn Jenner, who is a trans woman running as a Republican,
I've seen it all.
you know, like, yeah, like the most privileged upbringing possible, you know, millionaire, so many conflicting things about her make it so that identity, it just shows the lunacy of identity politics. I mean, this is what I used to bring up Farrakhan as the example. The man is anti-woman, the man is anti-Semitic, the man is like, you couldn't, like, he's just a deplorable human being, but you can't say anything about him because he has black skin and because he's Nation of Islam. So that somehow is Islamophobic as well, even though it's nothing to do with the actual religion of Islam. But anyway, separate issue. So they kind of, those kinds of things keep on coming up. Like if you're going to continue to support somebody simply because of their identity and not paying attention to their actual ideas, you're going to come up against some Farrakhan's and you're going to come up against some Caitlyn Jenners, and you're going to have some cognitive dissonance that you're going to need to deal with. So at some point, you're going to have to start recognizing the skin color of a person or the sex of a person is completely irrelevant. It has nothing to do with anything. These are immutable characteristics. They were just born that way. And it has absolutely nothing to do with any ideas that are in their head, any values that they hold dear. And until people can start to recognize that, we're going to continue, you know, having these ridiculous things like what you just described. And also people like me, they look at me and they're like, oh, your father is Palestinian, so you have to hate Israel. You also must be chanting from the river to the sea. No, I don't actually. You know what I mean? Like the fact that I was born to a man of Palestinian descent is not going to inform my mind. That simply informs my DNA, you know, but it's two completely different things. And you have so many Black people speaking up. I disagree with a lot of things, if not most things that Candace Owens says, but she's been really great with showing this as well. Like, I am a Black woman and I completely disagree with all these things that supposedly Black women should agree with. And yeah, there's so many people like us that are not fitting the criteria of what a minority person should or shouldn't believe. And when we don't fit the box that they want to shove us into, then they call us Uncle Toms, they call us Native informants, you know, they call Black people way worse things than that. But we're not stopping. We're still going to continue to believe what we believe. And it's so insulting, so insulting. But those same people do it to themselves. You know what I mean? So if they, these are the same white Americans that will talk about all white people have internalized racism. Like, not only are they forcing us minority groups into boxes, they're forcing themselves into a box too. They will self-flagellate over the fact that I'm white, so therefore I must be racist. Like, so they just it's insanity. It's a collective insanity, really. But I think that the fact that it's so irrational is actually a good thing, because it can't last. It really can't. It's already starting to come apart.
Yeah, and maybe to begin wrapping up, I ask all my guests the following two questions at the end of the podcast, because sometimes podcasts can get very pessimistic and negative. But if you have any, and I assume you do, hopefully, what gives you hope for the future? And the second question is, what are 5 books on any topic, fiction, nonfiction, that you would recommend to anyone?
I have a lot of hopes for the future. I used to think that I was a pessimist, but it turns out that I'm actually a hopeless optimist. I mean, even with the situation that's happening with Israel and Palestine right now, all I can focus on is all of the pundits in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Egypt, all over the Muslim majority world that are speaking such sense, that are being so rational and so correct on this topic. Meanwhile, Western media is getting it totally wrong. They're painting everything like a Disney, black and white, simplistic. But I see hope with um, I see hope with the Arab world progressing. So that gives me hope. I'm very happy to see that not only in so many Arab countries making peace with Israel, which of course is monumental, but with women in those countries, the feminists that are fighting, the women in Saudi Arabia that are burning their niqabs, the women in Iran that are, swaying their hijabs. They're getting arrested for it. But they're not stopping, that it really gives me hope that that side of the world is progressing in a way that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. So that's wonderful. As far as books, I'm gonna plug Sam Harris's End of Faith. I thought was any of Sam Harris's books, really. I could just list out 5 of his books and be done with this. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who you mentioned, she's my absolute hero. I'm very, very honored to be working for her foundation, the Ayaan Hirsi Ali Foundation. She wrote a few books, but I think Infidel, which is the book about her life, the first book about her life, is probably my favorite out of all of her books. I think it's the most poignant and it gives people the most background and perspective. I would also recommend a book by Masih Alinejad. She is Iranian and her book is called Wind in My Hair. And she is an absolutely phenomenal feminist who fights for women's rights in Iran. I mentioned her already, but Dr. Phyllis Chesler, her book, she's got so many books again. I could list all of her books. American Bride in Kabul is the one that I mentioned in this podcast about her experience living in Afghanistan as the wife of a Muslim man. And last but not least, I'll recommend Unveiled by Yasmine Mohammed.
Selfless plug. I like it.
Yeah.
And just to wrap up, what are you currently working on? How can people support your cause? I know there's an organization that you founded called Free Hearts, Free Minds. How can people support it? What is it? Maybe just...
Yeah, so that's Free Hearts, Free Minds is my baby. I'm so proud of it. It's an organization that supports people who have denounced Islam or who are part of the LGBT community that are living in the Muslim majority world where they could be executed for those crimes. And so you can go to my website, freeheartsfreeminds.com, click on testimonials to read stories from people that we have helped. So grateful that I'm able to give back in that way, because these are people who, as difficult as my story was, I was in Canada. So there was an out for me. There was a route to escape. But, when you're living in Sudan or Somalia or Afghanistan or, so many Muslim majority countries, there is no route. And so my organization tries to help those people as much as we possibly can. And I'm also writing a second book called Forgotten Feminists, and that focuses on the positive stories of women who have overcome. So that's really to inspire other women who are finding themselves in a situation and they're feeling like, yeah, but I can't get out, I want them to read stories from other women and feel inspired. And it's also a window for Western people to read it and to recognize how many women are fighting under this misogyny. We talk a lot about rape culture and patriarchy and all that stuff here in the West, which it's true, it exists, but it's a spectrum, right? It is to extremes in other countries around the world. And it would also be nice for people here in the West to start to appreciate what they have, appreciate the progress that's made, appreciate how Western values have supported them and, saved their life when they don't even know it, and to be more willing to defend those values.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you very much for coming onto the podcast, agreeing to speak with me. It was such a pleasure. Your book is phenomenal. I would recommend it to everyone. Um,
Thank you.
Yasmine Mohammed, thank you.
Thank you.